Good evening, everybody. Joe from NDB Aviation, and tonight I want to take the time and show you guys a video that I've been working on for a while. Now, this video I've gathered in-game footage, or at least in-sim footage, for the last few months, and I've been trying to decide which footage to use. And as there have been updates to both X-Plane 11 and Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, I really decided to make it all from scratch again. And I know that's delayed this project. It's been one I've been wanting to do for a while, but I feel like finally Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 is at a point where I can really show that it's progressing. It's getting better. The avionics are getting better. And X-Plane 11 is still X-Plane 11. It does what you expect. It just doesn't look as good as Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. And what this video is really going to be about is it's not going to be a cold and dark start. The aircraft are going to be on the runway in both flight simulators. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some basic G1000 and flight plan setup to do an practice IFR flight from Camilla, Georgia, Charlie X-ray uniform, to Albany, Georgia, Kilo Alpha Bravo Yankee. And in Albany, we'll shoot the RNAV 35 approach. Now, you can get approach charts for free from FAA, AirNav, SkyVector, FLT Plan Go, FLTplan.com, Garmin, all kinds of places. You can get these charts for free on the internet. So if you don't have that already, pause the video, search the RNAV GPS into runway 35 for Kilo Alpha Bravo Yankee, print it off or have it in the background so that way you can kind of follow along and see what I'm doing here, because that's what this flight is going to do. We're going to take off from Camilla, Charlie X-ray uniform, fly basically a direct path towards Kilo Alpha Bravo Yankee. And what we'll do is we're going to pick up the approach at OpView, which is one of the initial approach fixes, and then fly it inbound. And I'm going to show where the major differences are right now between X-Plane 11 and Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, and they're kind of annoying. Basically, that's it. And this video is to help anybody that's really trying to practice, become a better IFR pilot. Maybe you're a student pilot working on your instrument rating, or you're somebody that's flying the system already and you're hoping to practice going to airports you've never been to before. This is going to be aimed at you all to at least give you an idea of what you can expect if you're trying to practice your LPV approaches going into certain airports. Because while Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 is getting better, it's still not there for IFR practice. And I feel like the overall use for a flight sim when you're taking it seriously is going to be system work and also IFR flying. So without further ado, let's just jump in. I want you guys to see the differences. I've cut a lot of this down so that way you're not seeing one flight in X-Plane, then another flight in its entirety in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. I've highlighted the differences, and in this video I'll narrate this one because I've already shot it. I've already cut it down quite a bit, and I'll explain as much as I can what I'm doing and what the differences are between the two simulators as they stand with the mid-March, late March 2021 update for Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. And also there was a recent patch or update for X-Plane 11 within this last week. So late March 2021 is what we're at now. So that's where we stand for both simulators. Latest updates, and I'm doing this flight with my Logitech Extreme 3D Pro and my Honeycomb Bravo Throttle Quadrant and the good old Saitek Cessna rudder pedals. That's what I'm using for flying this one. So let's jump into the sim. At this point, we're going to cut in and I will show you the simulator. So we're starting off with X-Plane 11, the G1000 flight plan and setup. You can really tell this is X-Plane 11, folks. It's the latest and greatest, but you can see there's still some issues where X-Plane just looks like a dead, dull world. But it does have some great things, like these pop-up G1000 with the PFD and the MFD. You can check your alerts, you can set everything up, and then when you do the pop-up for your flight plan, it's pretty simple because you're not trying to do this at an angle like you would be normally. And I know that Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 has kind of worked this in, but the last time I used it, I had a crash to desktop. But here we are. The G1000 knows where we are. So one of the differences I've seen recently with Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 X-Plane 11, X-Plane 11 has the usual logic for the Garmin suites and the Garmin avionics where it knows where you are. It's going to have your departure airport already preset, but in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, if you don't set up your departure and your arrival before you load the sim session, you have to build it yourself, which isn't terrible. So we put in the flight plan. It's very simple. Point A, point B, nothing in between. Now we're doing the procedure. And what we're going to do is the RNAV for 3-4. I know I need to update the nav data and explain whereas Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 is already up to date. But here, let's look at the approach chart. Zebeb and Hark are too far away. OpView is the one I want to use, or we could have used vectors and just gotten ourselves onto the approach course inbound and used the vectors, and it would have initiated at FESIS. But I want to use OpView because you're going to see later in this video why. So here we go. OpView's in. We're not going to do the course reversal at OpView. We're just going to fly straight in. Minimums we are going to set. And if you look down at the LPV minimums, they are 495. Let's just round up to 500 to make this easy. So rounding it up, scrolling with my mouse scroll wheel, which you can do in both simulators. However, if you want to set baro minimums on the G1000 in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, you got to do it on the PFD. Now here, this is one of the other big differences. The flight plan loads the way it should. It's a direct to the airport of Albany because we have not activated the approach. When we do this later, you're going to see a difference. This is the way it should look. It's not the way it looks in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, unfortunately. So that's in. We're not going to worry about our frequencies. Again, I probably have a few mistakes here, but for overall purposes, this is a comparison video purpose only to show you what's different between the two sims. Here, we're back into the PFD, and what I want to do now is I'm going to use the Bravo throttle quadrant to set up the autopilot. And differences right now between Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 and X-Plane 11, and we're talking about stock. We're not talking about doing any of the glitch fixes that you have between the two sims right now. But if you're just a plug and play, X-Plane 11 will move in the hundreds places for the altitude, whereas Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 does thousands places. And then for the vertical speed, they're pretty much the same. However, you can switch between the different settings to set your autopilot up without interrupting another setting. Whereas Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, we have some issues. Another thing is, good thing, heading bug we can set within one integer of each other. However, in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, there were 5 or 10. It would be nice, though, to have a multiplier for X-Plane 11 to make it a little bit faster and easier. So we've got the flight director up, we've got our roll, we've got our autopilot set, everything's good to go, and we should be up and flying here in a second. So en route and approach activation. So what we're doing is we're activating the approach. You can see now on the pop-up of the MFD, we're no longer going to Albany, it's now going to OpView, which is what we want. To get this to work, I did find a little glitch from the stock first use settings with X-Plane 11 and the Bravo throttle quadrant. The nav feature did not want to work as expected, so do what you do in real life. Use the heading bug, get the airplane going where you want it to go, and then fix it later. So what I did here, heading bug, turn the airplane to the approach course, or at least the course that the GPS wants us to do, and then use the mouse, drag it over, and click nav for the GPS to take effect. It works, and it's going to carry us over to where we want to go. Initial approach, intercept, and CDI scaling in X-Plane 11. Here we are coming up to OpView, and it's going to sequence next to FESIS. Watch there in the GPS, see it's turning us, and we've gone to LPV scaling. This is important to notice because you're going to see a difference later in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 where that does not happen correctly. Now notice as well in the glide slope in the top right hand corner where a glide slope should be, the G with the magenta dot, it's high and out of view, and then on the autopilot panel we see glide slope and vertical nav are there. They're just not green yet because it's not within the realm of capturing it. So that is doing as it would in real life. Coming up next, we're going to have the glide slope intercept and transition in about 3 seconds. And unfortunately, I did have another pop-up in the way when it just started. So here's a glide slope intercept starting. Let me get that out of the way. And if you look here, it's coming right in. And the only downside that I would say that I see with X-Plane 11 currently is it started the descent slightly early. I would have wanted it to wait a little bit longer. And I'm sure if I dropped the flaps out right now, if I was within the speed range for the flaps, it would have worked. Notice now we have GPS and we have the autopilot on. It's in approach mode and it's captured the glide slope, and it's going to follow it all the way down until we disconnect the autopilot, or if we are lazy, it just does what it wants, which is not good. So next up, we're going to jump over to Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. G1000 and flight plan setup, just like I just did in X-Plane 11. Now, man, this looks so nice and polished. I gotta hand it to Asobo. Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 looks nice. Of all the flight sims I've seen throughout the years I've played and used flight simulators, it just looks good. But let's jump into the cockpit here. First off, I'm gonna set the autopilot up. And for any of you that are new to my channel or new to the Bravo Throttle Quadrant, this is one of the stock profiles with only minor tweaks, no glitch fixes. So it's going to interrupt the other functions. It's going to move in higher number of sequences than it should, but it still basically works. Autopilot setup. Now let's do our flight plan setup. And this is another one where it's a headache. Like, straight up, guys. I really don't like putting the G1000 together in Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 right now. It's not difficult, however, because of the way they've coded the pop-up window, it works, but almost every other time I do it, it crashes to desktop when I try to minimize it, and I'm tired of crashing to desktop. Before I made these videos, I had a crash to desktop issue that I'm still working on, trying to build a ticket for Asobo on, but here we go. Let's plug it in, and basically it's the same thing. We're going to use the scroll wheel to set Charlie X-ray uniform as our departure point, because we're building the entire flight plan from scratch here. One of the cool things that Asobo's done is, they've made the G1000 work a little bit easier than the real one in real life. The 530, I don't remember if it did this, but I know the G1000 gives you predictive lettering for the next one, because eventually it just rules out any other option as you're building up the letters for the airport or the fix you're going to, which is cool. But sometimes if you go one too far, it's a pain because you didn't expect it to do that, and sometimes the predictive gets the wrong one in there. But I digress. Now it's Kilo Alpha Bravo Yankee for our destination, and given this is a direct to flight in essence. I am not using the direct to function. I'm building a basic flight plan with no points in between, and then loading the procedure. So we've got the flight plan in. Let's do the procedure. So let's select our approach, and here we go. This is where the little differences start to show up between the two. Nav data is up to date, but the way the G1000 works here is not the same. You have to activate the cursor again, and then start scrolling through and setting things. And in the real G1000, it's going to let you do all of these boxes, just like it did in X-Plane 11, to set them up to get them the way you need them for your approach. So transition, we should have more options, but we don't. We have HARC, and we have UpView and ZBEB. We should have a vectors option here. Unfortunately, we don't. And this is one of the many other issues with Microsoft Flight Sim 2020. Now, it should have let us go to set minimums. It won't. Have to do that on the PFD. And it lets us go through all these points, which really doesn't matter. You just want to keep scrolling, and you want to get down to activate or load. However, we don't want to activate the approach yet. We just want to load it. And this is the unfortunate side. There's no load feature for some reason. It just skips to activate, which is not what you want to have happen. So what this just did is, instead of allowing us to still fly to Albany and then activate the approach along the way to go to OpView, it just gives us a very nice curved approach over to OpView, kind of like an RMP approach. If you don't know what that is, basically it's taking like a DME arc, if you know what that is, and making it easier, and you can just use GPS functionality to do that. However, this is what it did. It's taken us basically to FESS, We don't really want that. We want to go to op view first. And let's jump over to tracking to the initial approach fix. Well, we're tracking kind of. We're going to FESS instead of op view. And what we really want is op view first, excuse me, and then FESS after. Notice the glide slope is in view. Well, now we've gotten to op view, past op view, we've gotten to FESS, and we don't have any, well, we've gotten to op view and we're still tracking to FESS. We don't have any glide slope, it's well below us. We're still in the Enroute instead of terminal and then LPV. We should be at LPV at this point for the CDI scaling, and it's not doing what you really want it to do. You have to basically make up your own approach. Here we go. We cross from FESS to Oscock. There should be a glide slope here. It should be following the glide slope. Instead, I'm setting the vertical speed. So there we go, folks. That's the major difference here. The problem that I'm seeing with Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 is we have a lot of cool features. It looks really nice. But if you're somebody trying to actually practice an IFR approach, you're trying to do one of these and get better at it, or maybe you're going to somewhere, it's going to be bad weather, and you want to practice before you go. I'm sure if you're doing ILS, Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 should do a lot better. But if you're using the GPS system, it's just not going to be there for you the way it should be right now. And that's a real downside to me. I expect it to get better in time, and I expect more G1000 updates to come along. And I know there are some community mods that might fix this as well. So the main difference here that you need to take away if you are a flight student, if you're an actual instrument-rated pilot, and Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 is your go-to simulator right now, I would try Explain Out for a while. Update the nav data yourself. It's not that hard. I'll make a video in the next coming weeks or months about how to do that. It's pretty easy. I used to do it in the past, but here you go. If you are trying to truly practice, you saw from this video, the CDI scaling is off. It's not going to transition the way it's supposed to. It stayed in the Enroute phase. It should have gone Enroute, terminal, and then it should have gone into the LPV for the proper CDI scaling for an approach for IFR purposes. With that said, I don't see a problem with anybody using this as a introductory to IFR. I think Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 will get better, as I've said multiple times in this video. And you know, if you're practicing, it's going to be fine. If you're really trying to get better at IFR approaches for at least an exam, or say you're an actual pilot and you're going somewhere and you really want to practice, guys, I got to steer you towards X-Plane 11 still, because if it's somewhere you've never been, you've got your family in the back of your Skyhawk or your 182 or maybe a Piper Dakota, Piper Aero, or a Seneca, something nice, and you don't fly that often. Take this stuff seriously. There's nothing more dangerous in the air than a rusty pilot that has not prepared themselves. And this is a PSA right here. This is a public service announcement. If you're flying somewhere that you've never been in real life and you don't fly often, even though you have maybe your IFR ticket, and if you're going to fly IFR, please, for the love of all things holy and good out there in the world, practice often. And if you find yourself going into conditions that might turn into IFR and you're only a VFR rated pilot, don't go. Please don't go. Inadvertent IMC can be deadly, and it's not just you might hurt, it's other people on the ground below you. So I find that flight simulators, this subject to be very serious. I'm sorry for beating this horn like a dead horse. Forgive the pun there, or the term. But I really want to take this one home, and I want anybody listening this far into the video to take this seriously. If you're flying in real life and you don't fly often, a flight simulator is a very cheap investment to keep your ticket, to keep your life, and keep those with you and below you is safe. So if you're going places that you never go, I challenge you to do that, because that's good. But if you're somebody that does not fly very often, please take the time to use a flight simulator to familiarize yourself with those instrument approaches, or at least talk to somebody that's flown there before. There are airports that I've flown into before I came to the airlines, and even now in the airlines, where there are dangers around the airport that you need to brief mentally for yourself. They're on the approach chart usually. Some things though, there might be a higher than normal descent rate into the airport for the visual or even the glide slope. So you've got to be very careful. You got to read the notes, know the NOTAMs, and know the problems for the airport you plan to fly into or are researching to fly into. So sorry to get that really serious there for a second. But if you are going to do some serious simming for real life flying, I say X-Plane 11 is the best way to go for IFR practice. For fun, Microsoft Flight Sim 2020 is great, and it's getting better. So if you have questions, put them in the comment section below. I know I rambled again, but there were a couple things I really wanted to beat home on this one, because IFR flying is great, it's fun. It gets you wherever you want to go basically within reason if you know your limitations. And please, know your limitations. Even in VFR flying, know your limitations. It's never fun to be in a spot where you're wondering if you should have gone or not. I've only had one or two of those circumstances happen before. They were all before I got my commercial certificate. And I'll share those maybe one day at an air show if I'm sitting down with a bunch of people telling stories. We're all sitting around a campfire or something. I'll be happy to share. But I don't like it when people end up in those situations. I didn't like it when I ended up in those situations. So instead of finding yourself unprepared, use a flight simulator for what it's there for. Doing the things that help you become a better pilot, especially an instrument-rated pilot or somebody that's training to become one. Thank you for your time. Stay safe out there. Stay healthy. See you again real soon. Bye-bye.